بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وآله وصحبه أجمعين. Jazakumullah khairan everyone for attending. This is Mass National's Tarbiya Department's webinar on effective civic engagement with Sister Aber Kawas. My name is Wafat Manasra and I'll be the moderator tonight. If you cannot hear me, please shoot me an email. I'll get it right away. I'm confirmed audio was working for a few attendees, but if your audio is specifically not working, do email me so that I may check up on that for you or help you through and assist you with that. I will go ahead and hand the session to Sister Abir. The floor is hers. The session will be about an hour. Allow her to discuss the topic at hand, which is effective civic engagement. And at the very end, we will have question and answer, depending on how much activity there is. That could be about half an hour. It could be more or less. But you're free to attend as you please. You could leave early if you need to. This webinar will be available online. It is being recorded at the moment, and I will upload it on the MAS National Resource Center, which will include a YouTube link. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And now the floor is Sister Abir's.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm just going to start with a small dua. Allahumma shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. All praise is due to Allah. We praise Him. We seek His help and His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evils of our soul. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul. Alright. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Just wanted to start off by saying that I'm very honored and humbled tonight to be giving this webinar and talking to you all about this topic. I'm sure there are people who are called in right now who are people who I listen to gain knowledge. But inshallah today I'm really hoping to just share some thoughts and reflections with you all, talk about some things that maybe we want to discuss as a community, as an organization, especially about civic engagement, because of the time that we're in right now. This seems to be what everybody is talking about. But inshallah, I'm really not here to give much guidance or tell anyone what to do or anything like that. I think that hopefully we'll be able to discuss some ideas together, and at the end, I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your comments and questions, inshallah. So let's start by just talking about what we're going to be talking about today. As you see on the screen, we're going to start off with a short Tarbiya reminder, and then we're going to go into some more specific issues about the upcoming elections and what we should be thinking about looking at, inshallah. And then at the end, we're going to expand into thinking about our greater duty to society. And so the first thing to mention is why are we even having this discussion, especially as a Tarbiya webinar, right? I'm sure that when people think of the idea of Tarbiya, people are thinking about their spiritual development. They're thinking about things like manners, etc. But subhanAllah, very often Tarbiya is something that is not associated with our political decisions. And right now we are in a moment, especially with the upcoming elections, where this is all that everybody seems to be thinking about. This is all that's on everybody's minds. It's all over your social media feeds. It's everything that's on the news. Yesterday was a big presidential debate, and of course everybody was tuned in, and if you weren't tuned in, you were reading tweets about it and Facebook commentary. I literally saw commentary the whole way through, subhanAllah. So yeah, it's a tremendous moment that everybody is kind of focused on the political arena, but subhanAllah, at the same time, it's also like a really great moment for our country. Just historically, right now is a great movement moment in US history. It seems like everything is at a tipping point. You're seeing a lot of injustices. There are just huge movements that are happening right now. Of course, you have to mention the Black Lives Matter movement that has just taken over. It's what everybody's talking about. It's completely unapologetic and radically out there. Um, Recently, there's been a movement in Standing Rock and an indigenous movement that everybody's talking about. So subhanAllah, right now, because we have access to so much information, although there's a lot of attention on the political arena, people also have a lot of knowledge about the injustices that are going on, and there's a, a great amount of communication about this, and also analyzing everything that's going on multiple levels. And there seems to be a lot of disillusionment in our society. Um, People are disgruntled, people are not extremely happy with what they're being offered politically, and people are engaging in a lot of discussion about society and about where everything is going. There seems to be like this sense of doom somehow. Um, and so we have to think about us as people who are working with communities, people who are somewhat leading communities and indirect contact communities. What are the conversations that we need to be having to direct people towards not just an optimistic view of the world, but a view where they feel like they have a stake, that they can make a change, and that like us as a Muslim community can be at the forefront of that change. So just starting with the topic of Tarbiya, we want to go back to just the idea that, subhanAllah, Islam, and we think about this throughout our daily process of worship. Islam informs almost everything that we do, even the most small specific things, like the way we eat, what hand we eat with, our salah, our rituals, how we shape our days, how we communicate with our family, how we organize ourselves. Islam seems to inform everything about what we do, but a lot of times the Muslim community disassociates politics from Islam. And it disassociates our Islamic morals from our political decisions. No doubtedly, this is a product of how society is shaped and formed these days, the secularization of government, and us being born into these societies, or us living in these societies where it seems like talking about what's going on in your community is not something that you should be discussing in a khutbah. Instead, in a khutbah, you should be talking about focusing on salah, or you should be talking about fasting. And so us as people who understand Tarbiya as this combination of our spirituality and our activism, first of all have to reorient ourselves to think of making our political and social decisions morally and from an Islamic perspective, and understanding that they're spiritual decisions and they are things that we will be held accountable to with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so decisions that are informed by our taqwa and by our understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I'm going to talk about 3 quick tarbiyah principles that we should be thinking about when we're thinking about our effective civic engagement as a community. And this is going to be like the reminder spiritual section of the talk, and then we're going to go into more practical examples. So 3 reminders. First reminder is going back to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as thinking about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents society to us in the Quran. And so yesterday when the debate was going on, I just had this kind of reoccurring thought in my mind that, subhanAllah, during the Prophet's time, the Quraysh used to gather together, and the leaders from the tribes used to gather together. Of course, this was like an exclusive gathering for people who had wealth or people who had status, and they would gather together and they would debate with each other. And when I was watching yesterday, and I think, a lot of, I'm just saying my own opinion, but maybe some people agree, it just seemed like a spectacle. It seemed like everybody was just like paying attention, watching this complete, like, it was like almost like a show, right? And I was thinking how during the Prophet's time, if the Prophet was alive, would he be paying all of this attention to this spectacle, or what would the Prophet be doing? Um, and during the Prophet's time, he really built a movement when he was calling people towards Islam. And of course, we understand that when the Prophet was calling people towards Islam, he was calling people to a better and more just society. He was spending time working with the marginalized, working with the oppressed, educating people, being in touch with people, building relationships with people. He was spending a tremendous amount of time doing this, and the focus was not on the Quraysh and their conversations, right? The Prophet ﷺ was not trying to base what he was teaching to try to accommodate what the Quraysh were teaching about. He wasn't paying attention to what they were talking about. The Prophet ﷺ had a message, and he was spreading that message to the people who would listen. And he was building a movement that became so strong that it had to be reckoned with, that the Quraysh had to give the Prophet ﷺ attention, that he had some leverage to be able to do that. And so, when we're thinking about what we are doing as a community, we also want to think about, are we following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ? Are we thinking of things and engaging with our society in a way that is following the sunnah? And secondly, following the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Quran, reading the Quran, thinking about the time that we're in right now. Inshallah, tomorrow people will be fasting for the 10th of Muharram. And some of you may have fasted today, and people will be fasting all throughout the next week. And we celebrate this time because we think of the Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And when you read the Quran and you're thinking of the Prophet Musa, when we associate ourselves, when we're reading these stories, we're associating our struggles and we're identifying with Bani Israel in the story. We're not identifying with Fir'aun. We're not thinking about what are the noblemen in Fir'aun, what were they discussing, right? We were identifying with the oppressed, and that is who the prophets were catering to. That's who they were bringing their message to. In the Quran, every story that is mentioned, the Quran is so filled of stories. The stories are often of unjust societies. And really the equivalent of the unjust society is a society that is devoid of taqwa. They are acting in these unjust ways because they are not being God conscious. And the Prophet's messages were to bring them back to the idea of God and people centering God in their lives and centering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their lives. And I just want to keep that as a general reminder that these are our foundations. And oftentimes we get very kind of distracted from what our message is and what our role as khulafa on this earth are. Secondly, I just want to also bring up some of the words that are in front of you here, some shura, brotherhood, justice, and balance, and think about these principles when we are making our decisions, but also when we're interacting with our communities. So, for example, when we're thinking of the idea of justice and balance, who is facing injustice in our society? Who is implicating the injustice? Who is causing the injustice? Are we thinking about this? What does justice and balance really mean to the United States of America? What does it mean to me living in Brooklyn, New York? What does it mean to somebody living in San Diego, California? What does it mean to somebody living in Minnesota? What are the injustices in our society, and how do we bring balance back to them? Thinking of the idea of shura, right? This is a Tarbiya concept. This is an Islamic concept for us. Shura. A lot of times when we think of shura, we just think of it as us sitting in a boardroom meeting and we're making shura about like what the food for the event should be, or like making shura about where the event should be. But subhanAllah, something that I've learned over time with organizing communities is that us as people who work with communities, us as people who are organizing communities, who have leadership positions in our communities, one of the most important things is to have shura and have communication and buy-in from the members of our congregations, from the members of our halaqah, from the members of our usra. Oftentimes, there are Muslim representatives in organizations who are speaking on platforms and they're speaking on behalf of Muslims and they're speaking on behalf of our community, but they're not engaging in our community. Or oftentimes people who have positions of power in our community are people who have the privilege to have those positions. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's in an unjust way. So we see this a lot in the boards of a masjid, where the people who have the positions to make decisions are the people who funded the masjid, or the people who are on the board are the people who donate, right? And that's causing an imbalance in how we're dealing with class relations in our masjid, because people who can't afford to give all the money to the masjid now have no say, even if they attend the masjid, because now we have created these boundaries and created these lines. So as a community, when we're thinking about civically engaging, when we're thinking about what are the issues that we should be caring about, and I'm going to talk about voting, of course, but we want to talk about even like leading campaigns, creating outreach committees, creating social justice committees. Are we communicating with our congregation to see what are the needs that they have? Or are we just sitting in a boardroom and thinking like, I've experienced this, so therefore I think this is the need of our community? Also, like the idea of brotherhood. Again, this is very associated to this. When we think of brotherhood, especially in MAS, we're thinking about the people right next to us. We're thinking about who's sitting next to me and how I'm treating them. And of course, that's really important. And we're thinking about our neighbor and how I'm treating them. But brotherhood, the idea of brotherhood and sisterhood in Islam, is something that ties us intrinsically with the members of our ummah. And so loving for my brother or my sister what I love for myself doesn't just mean my sister who's sitting in usra next to me. It also means loving what I love for myself for my brother or sister in Islam who lives in another country that maybe being bombed right now, right? Or that lives in poverty. Or loving for my brother and sister who is loving for myself what I love for another person, right? Somebody who's in jail right now, unjustly arrested, right? Entrapped. There are so many stories in our community, and we disassociate ourselves from them. We distance ourselves from them very often. And so are we really practicing brotherhood and sisterhood when we do this? So these are all like really basic concepts, right? But we need to think of them as things that are part of our moral decision making. And I think the last one I really want to mention, it's not right here on the screen, but I do want to mention the idea of ghafla. And ghafla is this idea of like distraction and society being distracted with things, not paying attention to what's right, right? And I think one thing that separates us in our religion and the way that we see the world is that we are trying to see above what everybody is looking at. We're trying to see beyond what everybody is looking at. We're trying to see beyond the distractions of this dunya. And I think a lot of times when people only rely on mainstream understanding of politics, or what is just coming at them from certain news outlets, just they're buying into this ghafla because they're only seeing what's being presented to them, and we're not investigating enough, we're not being curious enough, we're not asking the right questions. So I really wanted to start with these kind of small principles that are, of course, we've talked about them so many times, and they're part of our vernacular, they're part of the way that we live our lives and the way that we strive to live our lives. But I want us to think that these are very simple concepts that we need to apply when we're thinking about being civically engaged, when we're thinking in a more broader context, when we're thinking about our society. It really, really starts with the internal and our understanding of these tarbiya concepts, and these things can be applied to the outside. And especially when we don't have control of our political system at this point, right? We are dealing with what we have, and so what we do have control over is our moral decisions, our individual decisions, and then how we are building as communities, building within societies to be able to change the society that not only we are disgruntled with as a community, but many people across the country are really facing this time where people are really, really paying attention to the injustice that's happening and people are wanting to make change. So inshallah, I'm going to shift now. I think that I have lectured y'all enough about stuff that you think about, inshallah. So we want to talk about the elections. We want to talk about making conscious decisions right now. I'm not going to go so much into voting and voter registration efforts, although I hope that's something that's been going on around the country. That's something that I know that MAS chapters have been engaging in. But I want to talk more about, well, what are our votes counting for? And right now, honestly, I think there's only like a few more weeks to be able to register to vote in New York City. By the 14th, we will not be able to register for this election. So talking about some strategies for voter registration is something that I'm going to skip over a little bit. However, we will go into some get out the vote efforts and talking about that. I just want to start off with some statistics for everybody. So these are rough statistics. Maybe somebody has different numbers and they can correct me by typing a message. But right now, I'm going to start off with Arab Americans, even though, of course, the Muslim community is not only Arab American. It's just because I work for an Arab American organization that I have this statistic. But just, if it's interesting for anyone to know, there are 3.5 million Arab Americans in the United States, and we're represented in 55 congressional districts. And the majority of the Arab Americans in the United States actually are not Muslims, subhanAllah. So this is just a statistic that I happen to have, but I'm just sharing with you all. As Muslims, there are 7 to 8 million Muslims in the United States right now, roughly. Most of the settlement is in New York City, Los Angeles, Detroit, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Jacksonville. And there are 2.7 million Muslims that are living in key swing states right now, such as Michigan, Florida, Virginia. Swing states also change throughout election season. So I know right now, like Ohio is a big swing state. And there are a lot of people who are trying to mobilize around swing states. But these are like the numbers of Muslim communities. So we want to talk about why are we even paying attention to these elections? As an organization, even as a community, the election season that comes about, so there are constantly elections happening, but especially for the presidential elections, this is when people start to engage in mass conversations. And these are really big opportunities for us as communities to mobilize people, to bring out awareness. These are great opportunities for people to start to build movements and catalyze on people's energy and capitalize on people's energy. I'm correcting myself. Because people are very, very involved now, it's a topic of discussion. And so if you're in a chapter that is struggling to build a PACE committee, or is that struggling to build an outreach committee, etc., I'm sure at this time, especially with the sentiment that's going on around the country, with what politicians are saying about Muslims, people are really, really revved up, people are excited, people are angry, people are upset, people want to do something. People are really just kind of like over listening to somebody talking about them on the news and them not having any say in what's being said. And so this is a great moment for us to build and capitalize on that building. And of course, especially when we do like massive voter registration efforts, we do them around the presidential season because that's when people are paying attention. But doing this at this moment is something that will actually help the community overall over time. And I want to talk a little bit about voting down the ballot and about different positions in the government that are also just as important for our community to think about, and for us to not just be so distracted with the presidential races, and to think about how do other bodies within our government also affect our issues and the things that we care about. I'm going to mention this because, of course, I'm only speaking from my own opinion, but it's something that I notice that people are talking about, that people are discussing. Generally, I think the Muslim community is not really leaning towards one candidate or another for the presidential races, and it seems like, especially when it comes to foreign policy, etc., Muslims are just never happy with anyone for foreign policy, right? And there's serious reasons for that. It is because of the direction of the foreign policy of the country, but of course, because of these reasons, people are not exactly overly enthusiastic with one candidate over another. And historically, um, kind of these factors have almost like historically we've Muslims have voted more conservatively over the last few elections, and then like overwhelmingly voted for Obama in the last election, and a lot of that was because of promises that were made about Guantanamo Bay, um, or because of just the critique that he brought forth of a lot of Islamophobic policy. But right now, I think that like we just want to move the conversation beyond that, and talk about other parts that we can be thinking about. For example, right now in New York City, what I'm really thinking about as a local organizer is that next year we're going to have a mayoral race, and our entire city council is up for re-election or new elections. And so that's something that I think is more effective for me to be organizing around, because it's something that is more tangible for our community. However, doing the massive voter registration at this point is more important, because next year, even if the race is actually closer to our issues and closer to our communities, people will actually be less engaged with the race than they are now. And so if we want to do voter registration, if we want to do voter mobilization, this is the moment where we really push people. And so you can think about that if you want to continue doing voter registration efforts, that even if the deadline passes in your state or in your district, you can continue to do voter registration in this upcoming month, in this upcoming season, because people will still be interested in it. But I want to talk about other things that matter to us. Of course, just thinking about that, the executive branches in our, like the federal, the state, the city, right? What their roles are: legislative, the Senate, the state assembly, city council, and thinking about what else is on your ballot besides the presidential vote. A lot of you all will have to actually research this, but anybody who can Google their district will find what else is being up for, or who else is being put up for election or re-election. And I want people to actually take the time to look up what are the roles and responsibilities of the people who are being elected, and how do they affect you, and what is your what is the decision that you're going to make for that, and not just focus on presidential. And so, like, for example, really, really locally, thinking about your district courts, your district attorney, your comptroller, etc. And I'm going to talk about some very practical examples of why these things matter, and why us focusing on the presidential is being really, really short-sighted. Because whether or not you're happy with whoever the upcoming president is, or whether you're just not going to be happy with either person, that person only has control over certain things. And there are many other factors to what the policies are that they can push, what legislation they'll draft, etc. And there are other bodies that regulate and interact with these people. And so us just focusing on a person or a name is us not thinking deeper into what we should be thinking about. So I'm going to give some practical case studies over the past few years that you guys can, maybe some of them you will identify with, and maybe some of them are just things that you will learn about today. But they're things that have been in the news, and I just want to talk a little bit about how they matter, or why they matter to us. So the first case study is going to be this case of DACA and DAPA. And the idea of, or not the idea, and like what happened with immigration reform in the US during the Obama presidency. So when Obama was running for election, immigrant groups around the country were really, really talking about this idea of comprehensive immigration reform. And comprehensive immigration reform is something that talks about naturalization, how many people are becoming citizens, and it's talking about how fast the processes are of people coming into the US, people becoming citizens in the United States, comprehensive immigration reform is talking about the amount of refugees that are allowed in the United States. It's a lot about talking about borders and job availability. And for people who are not documented, these are really, really large populations in many Muslim communities because of where people come from and how people enter into the country. Even though there's also a huge amount of indigenous Americans in the United States, or Black Americans who are Muslim, but there are also a large number of immigrant Muslims, and we deal with them in our community, and we know that there's a lot of issues around naturalization. So when President Obama was running, there was this platform of comprehensive immigration reform that immigrant rights groups sat and drafted many types of legislation that they believed would be beneficial to their movement and beneficial to what they were trying to gain as immigrants in the United States. And it seemed like the president was very open to these ideas. The president, in his first 100 days of presidency, proposed the DACA and DAPA legislation. For those who are not familiar with DACA and DAPA, really quickly, DACA and DAPA would allow for people who are not documented. So DACA would allow for childhood arrivals who are not documented, people who came to the United States before the age of 16. So kind of the argument is that they did not have any control of coming States, right? Were able to apply to be able to work for 3 years, apply for permanent residency for 3 years, be able to get their working papers. And so for students or for people who were trying to raise money for school, etc., this was something that allowed them to work legally and also gave them a chance to kind of feel like for 2.5 years or for 3 years until they renewed their DACA, they weren't going to be deported. DAPA was another legislation that was for these same rights, but for parent arrivals. So the PA is for parent arrivals. And so this would allow deferred action for parents of U.S. citizens who were living here, who were undocumented, even though their children were documented. And Obama presented this as an executive order. And it seemed like politically this was a win. Immigration organizations were really, really happy about this legislation being pushed forward. There was a massive amount of funding going into doing DACA and DAPA education and getting people signed up for the program. And then the states and the courts so it's like several states, including Texas, in the cases, Texas, right, the cases predominantly taking place in Texas, sued the Obama administration for saying that Obama did not have the right as an executive to propose this legislation onto states because states have their own rights and they're like constitutionally then the presidential rights, the federal rights, right? They fight over who gets rights over what. And so this case was frozen for several years. The DAPA program was frozen, and extended DACA, which would allow the DACA program to be longer than it was, were frozen because of the state courts and because of the Senate and the governors in the state who were opposing Obama's bill. And so and then basically the end of this is that eventually the Supreme Court, this case was brought up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court voted that it was unconstitutional for the president to propose this bill or to enforce it nationally. And so right now it is only states that are accepting DACA or DAPA that have those programs, and the program is frozen. And so DAPA is not going into effect and has not gone into effect. And probably whoever the next president is will either have to like rebrand this legislation and propose it, or the legislation will just kind of be erased and will not go into effect at all. So this is just an example of how, even though the president proposed something, it was blocked by other political forces. And we want to remember this because a lot of us are thinking, oh, this person is going to become president, or this person is going to become president, and they're going to propose A, B, and C, and that's just going to be it. But that's not the case. And so it's really important for us to think about who are the judges in our area, who are our Senate, who are our governors, et cetera, and what are their principles and their values, and because they will have a lot of say over the programs that are even federally proposed. The second thing is wage reform. So talking about the Fight for 15 campaign, right now Fight for 15 is a campaign that is trying to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which is a livable wage. And of course, this is important for communities that are not, communities that do have many members of them that are not making enough to support themselves off of minimum wage. There are plenty of communities and people who are working minimum wage jobs or working 2 or 3 jobs just to support their families. A lot of the opposition to Fight for 15 will say that it's only kind of teenagers who are working at McDonald's, etc. But there are people who survive off of these wages, and these are the only jobs that they can actually work. And so right now, it's a national conversation. It was mentioned in some of the debates, and there's a campaign to try to get this to be proposed federally, that the minimum wage gets expanded to 15. But the way that Fight for 15 is winning state to state. And so in New York City, for example, we passed $15 last year. Actually, it was the beginning of this year. So right now we have $15 minimum wage that will go into effect over 5 years, right? Because the governor proposed this legislation. So although nationally it's not been ratified, it's not happening in all these different states. Nationally, statewide in New York City, this is something that has been ratified. And so just thinking about again, these factors that like people right now are just focusing on the presidential race, but your local government is making huge decisions about the budgets, about what our tuitions are, how much we're getting paid, etc. And so we want to think about that. And then the second, the last example that I want to talk about is a very, very local example of how our votes, or how who we're bringing into office legislatively, how these things are affecting our movements and the things that we're proposing. And so Black Lives Matter is a platform that, of course, I mentioned before, everybody is talking about. And there has been very, very specific demands of Black Lives Matter, but a lot of the movement sparked because of the idea of police killings and unjust police killings of people around the country. And so you're hearing about all these cases. You're hearing about Mike Brown and Eric Garner, etc. So although Black Lives Matter is this huge movement and this huge conversation that is happening locally, this movement is happening through small wins with local governments, right? There is a lot of push onto the federal, or the presidency, to be like discuss these issues, but a lot of times even the president doesn't have jurisdiction over what the police department is doing in like Missouri or Mississippi, etc. Right? So the president can, and actually our president has made many statements talking about police brutality or police violence, etc., but there haven't been any changes made federally. And it's probably going to be a very difficult fight to have these changes made federally. And you also just can't, we're talking about racism, so this is systematic racism. It's embedded in so many different policies, education policy, and of course incarceration policies, etc. The president cannot snap their fingers and say eradicate racism, or as many of us fear, like continue, right, and like make it worse. And it's already pretty bad. So we want to think about what are the local things that like Black Lives Matter groups are doing on the ground. One of the examples in New York City is people are thinking about who they're voting in for district attorney, the DAs. And this is because whether it's been the case of Eric Garner or another case of a police shooting a young boy who's 19 years old named Marley Graham in the Bronx, these police unjustly killed these human beings, and the police officers who killed them have not been fired, are still working, have had no they've had no punishment to anything, and this is because, for example, in Marley's case, the district attorney lost some of the evidence or made a mistake in the filing of the cases, so the case was thrown out. And so their family is calling on the judges in the district to reopen the case and to address what's going on with these police officers because the district attorney hasn't done that. And so this is a very, very local fight. It's thinking about who are the DAs, who are the judges, who are hearing these cases. And when we live in a country that has a very flawed legal system of incarceration, that people are getting arrested for very small petty crimes and going to jail for 2 to 3 years. There's been even documentaries of people getting arrested for small petty crimes and going to jail for 25 to life because of these flawed systems. It matters who the judges are. It matters who the DAs are. It matters who the mayor is and who they're electing as your commander of the police, etc. And so these are conversations that we need to have as a community. We need to stop thinking about just this one debate that everybody is watching, and we need to think about what are the small local changes that we need to make in our localities, in our communities, and who are the people in power that we need to target to make these changes. So I'm just putting out I just wrote a bunch of things that we can be thinking about, and I think these are major issues for our community. Things like immigration reform, wage reform, mass incarceration happening in this country, police brutality, water and food access. Right now, when we're talking about Standing Rock, these are indigenous people in the United States saying that they don't have, that they're getting poisoned water, right? Or they don't have access to water. We heard earlier this year, Flint, Michigan, and these communities that are getting poisoned water coming to them. And so this is something that we need to be thinking about as a Muslim community, as people who are trying to bring forth justice, thinking about food access, even thinking about who is allowing GMOs to be put into our food and etc. All of these things are happening through legislation. Housing policies. This is extremely important for people who are working with low-income communities or immigrant communities. People are coming in, they can't find affordable housing. This is something that the mayor can deal with, something that your city council can propose legislation for. Are we thinking about these things? Of course, Islamophobic policy. So our surveillance policy, how police are treating us, people who are being arrested. These are things that we're dealing on federal levels. It's also something that we're dealing on citywide levels. In New York City, for example, it was our police department that created a whole demographics unit to spy and surveil on college students, on mosques, on local speakers. People like Imam Siraj Wahaj have a file with our NYPD. These are very, very local issues. So we cared about who the police commissioner was and how did we have a police commissioner that created this entire department. This was an extremely important issue to us. One of the big issues over the last year has been refugee quotas. People are not realizing that it is the House of Reps and Congress that is proposing and ratifying how many refugees are allowed into the country and from where are they coming. And people are proposing a lot of bans and are trying to ban Syrian refugees coming and conflating them with ISIS and terrorism, etc. And so Syrian refugees are having trouble coming into the United States. I mean, if you think about the amount of refugees the United States has taken over the past few years, other countries are taking in, like Jordan or Lebanon, they're taking 3 million, 4 million, Turkey. People are taking in people by the millions, and the United States was only allowing 60,000 refugees overall, and so only a percentage of those were Syrian refugees. And so there was legislation to try to expand this number. And I'm going to just pause and say that I think the number is 60,000, and if I'm incorrect about that, I'll fix it later. But yeah, so there is only a proposed number of refugees that are allowed to come into the United States, and they're not just from Syria, but from Central America, from Iraq, from other types of refugee situations. And so we're, as people who are especially identifying with these crises right now, are we thinking about who are we lobbying to get more refugees to come into the country? Who are we lobbying to make sure that their stays are better for them, that they're getting educational programs, language access, that they're getting job access? etc. Like just the plight of refugees coming in is extremely traumatic and really complex and complicated, and there's a lot of things that we can change to make that better. And so we want to think about what are the issues, and these are just things that I presented to you. But like I said in the beginning, I think it's really important for us to be having these discussions within our communities and asking our congregations especially what are the issues that they care about. You know, is there homelessness in our congregation? Do people not have access to affordable food, or healthy food in our congregation? Do people not have access to fair wages in our congregation? Are people suffering um, because of immigration policy? Do we have undocumented people? And we have to really, really think beyond ourselves, because if we are probably sitting in a room and making decisions about what our outreach program is looking like or what our PACE program is looking like, that means we're pretty privileged enough to be able to sit there and go to these meetings and make those decisions. And especially as MAS members, you know, we talk a lot about being dedicated to the movement, etc. But something that I learned over organizing with communities over time is that the people who are actually most directly impacted and the people who are most vulnerable are often the people who do not have time to go out to rallies and marches because they cannot get an hour off of work or they'll lose their job. So we have to think about who we're representing for, who we're speaking for, and also, are we giving opportunities for them to speak? Are we giving opportunities for the most disadvantaged in our congregations to have a voice, to make change, to lead where we're going, and what we're trying to do? What are the changes that we're trying to make? Or are we just talking above them, talking beyond them, talking about ourselves? Maybe I think that Islamophobia is the biggest issue, and maybe like what I care about is just bullying in school. And I'm not minimizing that issue. That's a huge issue, right? Because I have a cousin, or you know, maybe somebody has a daughter or a son and they got bullied in school, right? And so this is something that they care about. So they're going to say, we need to focus on Islamophobia and bullying, right? But there might be also somebody in your congregation who has a family member that is arrested because of an Islamophobic policy, right? And we know that there have been so many entrapment cases that have happened in our country, and there have been mentally ill people who are targeted for these entrapment cases, or people who have low IQs, or people who are impoverished. If you think of the Newburgh Four, right? All these cases. Siraj Mateen, somebody who was in New York City, somebody right now who has terror charges, and does not even have an IQ high enough to be able to create any type of plot, right? And so, like, you know, these are more vulnerable people, and we have to think about them. And maybe their family members are not coming to the mosque, and maybe they don't have a leadership position in the mosque because they can't, or because they don't have access to it, or they don't speak English well enough, etc. So we really want to think about the nuance of the issues that we want to talk about. And we want to, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He favors and talks about the most oppressed. We want to also think about who are the most vulnerable in our community, and we want to put them at the forefront of what we're trying to change and the changes that we're trying to make as a community. So that's kind of like, I do want to conclude, but I'm going to really, really just quickly talk about, of course, November 8th and the upcoming elections. And these are just some tips that we can do as community leaders, as people who are organizing communities, to get out the vote and to engage our communities. So the first thing is, like I mentioned, researching the ballot, researching who is coming up for election and what their roles and responsibilities are. So is somebody coming up for election and their responsibility is to propose budgets for the city, and do those budgets affect wage, and do those budgets affect housing, etc. And then thinking about who do we want in office, why do we want them in office, and what are some campaigns that we can build, what is some pressure that we can put on this person if we're putting them in office as a community, right? So if somebody is in charge of budgeting and we want to vote for this person, because we think that they have the best plans. And we want to hold them accountable to their plans. We want them to let them know that, hey, in our Muslim community, we have A and B and C person affected by this, and so we want you to pay attention to that. And you can do this by arranging meetings, just by them knowing the demographics of who are voting for them will affect the decisions that they make. So first thing is to research the ballot and research the roles and responsibilities, and taking some time to actually read about what is the role and responsibility of your Senate and what is the roles and responsibility of your city council. And having that discussion, that can be something that is just an educational workshop that you can offer to your halakha, to your, if you do a community town hall, etc. A lot of people really don't know this really basic information. And just get out the vote efforts. I'm going to talk about some things that are things that we should be thinking about. If you just give me 1 second, because I have to deal with a technical thing. Okay. Okay, so one thing, okay, so just a couple of things to go through. People setting up a community.
Aber, sorry, I can't see your screen anymore.
Okay, sorry. Let me just change that. Sorry, everybody. Okay.
There you
Can
go.
you see my screen now? Okay, cool.
That's
Great. Okay. So, community. Sorry, I'm going to go back. So, get out the vote efforts. Research the ballot. Second, community phone bank. This is a really kind of fun thing that you guys can do as a community if you want to organize this in your local chapter. Setting up a day and just calling out people in your congregations and just reminding them, hey, let's go out and vote. I'm just reminding you to go out and vote. One thing that we usually do is like we'll have laptops when we do this, and we have like the poll location site thing, and so like people will be like, I don't know where to vote, and then we'll just ask them for their address. We'll tell them where their poll location is. Just providing some extra support for the community. I'm mentioning VAN on this slide. So VAN is a database that communities can ask for access for, and this database you can access addresses and numbers of people by demographics, so you can actually create a list of like, I mean, it's really kind of not so accurate, but you type in things like Arab or Middle Eastern or like South Asian. That's what we do in our community, and I work in an organization that again works for the Arab community. That's why I'm mentioning that as an example. And so we'll look up for these names, and then we'll find in our like locality in like in a 10-mile radius all of these names, and we'll just call them up. And then we even do sometimes like just door knocking, and that's not a bad idea to just even in your own community do door knocking. Again, that's like an outreach method. So doing a community phone bank, we get access to the van. We build these databases, but you don't necessarily have to have the van. You can do it with your halakha members. You can do it with congregation members if you have databases of people, and just call people up and say, hey, by the way, tomorrow is election day. If you're able to vote, you should go out and do that. Here are some issues that you should care about, etc. Sometimes they're really fun to do. I have like lots of like long conversations with like aunties who tell me about like who they want to vote for, and it's, you know, it's interesting. So you can do that as an event. Get a group of volunteers who wants to do the calling, buy them some pizza, you know. That's something that you could do to get out the vote. Some other things you can do is get out the vote efforts that I always recommend is on election day, especially in New York City, we do this because we have a huge number of non-English language speaking voters, right? So these are like new immigrants or people who don't necessarily have language abilities in English to be able to go out and vote, and so they have a right to translation service when they go vote. But when we do community organizing, we actually send out teams to local schools or like polling sites, and we'll just send a team of like 2 to 3 people to stand outside the polling site, and whenever they see somebody who they kind of like identify as a community member, they say salam to them, and they say, hey, Do you need any help voting? Do you need translation? Do you want me to come in with you? And so this is a way to provide comfort and encouragement for community members, but also make sure that their rights are ensured. A lot of, like voting disenfranchisement is something that is actually a huge problem in the United States. And it's very systematic, right? And if you read about the civil rights movement, technically Black people had a right to vote, but if you see all these stories like in southern states that when they were trying to register, they would make them, they would give them these exams, or they would do something like guess how many marbles are in this jar, or else you can't register to vote, or else you can't vote, right? So these are actual things that happen historically, and there's a huge amount of people getting turned away from the polls on voting day, or the Board of Elections like losing their voter reg forms, etc. So you want to build and send teams that can go out and make sure that people have voting rights, that somebody's not turning them away from their polling locations. And you can actually go in with somebody into the polling station and help them vote, right? So like it's just like parents can bring their children in with them when they're voting. You can bring a friend with you to stand with you while you vote. And that's a right that you have. Or that's, at least I know in New York City, a right that we have. So you can look that up in your locality. And so we do these teams, we stand in front of polling locations, we see people, and we make sure that they're not turned away. If they need help, somebody will go in and help them. These are just extra protections for our community. We know that we're a community that is often marginalized. We know that we're a community that has to be aware of racism. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking about these things and just thinking about how to ensure ensure a positive experience for our community members. So those are just some kind of tips for Get Out the Vote. Also, at the end of this, when I'm done speaking, which will be very shortly, you guys can also present some tips or anything if you want. But I just kind of wanted to end with just a kind of conclusion that, like, yes, we are. So firstly, like I said before, we want to think about the Tarbiya, and we want to think about our moral consciousness when we're making civic choices, when we're making choices for our society. In this upcoming election, when it comes to voting, we want to be able to have foresight. So we want to be able to think about what are changes that we want to make in our community in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, and what are issues that we need to care about, and what is the strategy to make these changes. And it needs to be a multi-pronged strategy. It has to be about community organizing, and it has to be about building campaigns, and it has to be about building strategies. And we want to emphasize voting, but we don't want to make that the only road that people can take, because unfortunately, if that's the only solution that we give to people, and people are still disillusioned with the politicians who get into positions, they will be disillusioned to continue doing any type of movement work. We want to change and build impact for our communities on a much greater level, and think beyond what is being presented to us. And just as like as a reminder overall, and I said I would kind of end this talking about greater social justice issues. Right now, as a Muslim community, I think that we really can't survive much longer if we don't engage with other movements, and if we don't build intersectionality with other movements. We really want to start to think about aligning ourselves with people who are calling out injustice. And maybe the people who are calling out the injustice are not the people who are making huge political wins on this legislative side, but we want to work with movements. So really aligning ourselves with movements, being allies, building allyship. I think building a movement that really, really radically calls out the injustices that's happening to the Muslim community specifically, just like how everybody's talking about Black Lives Matter, just like how right now Standing Rock is something that is a huge issue. and it's not even solved. The indigenous community is talking about not having water. I mean, right now, I mean, today, if we want to talk about being present, right? It's a national holiday, right? And it's some people want to say Columbus Day, right? But like others are they call it Indigenous Day, right? Like Indigenous Rights Day. People trying to reclaim, but um, people who are indigenous to this to like where we're living right now are don't even have access to water, and we're celebrating this holiday that still continues even though people just all know the contradictions of what today means, and especially us as Muslims. I think we should really be aligned with like an indigenous movement or with the Black Lives Matter movement, because they are so relevant to us. They are, our ummah is part of these communities. We are tied to these communities. Our history is tied to these communities. Like if you study Islamic history, then you know that Columbus' expedition would not have ever even been funded without the fall of Granada and the fall of Islamic Empire. So we want to connect what's happening and really feel like we are at stake, and work with communities in this like pluriversal kind of way where we are unapologetic at our views and our identities as Muslims, but we're working in allyship with other communities. We want to be at the front of social movements and social change. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks of us. And we have historically always been part of social change, whether that's the civil rights movement, whether that's the workers' rights movement. People don't know that like there were Yemenis involved in the farm workers movement that were happening in California. One of them, Naji Dayafullah, he was a Yemeni farm worker who was killed working with Cesar Chavez. So like we don't know this, but like we are part of so much history of change in the United States, and we really need to continue to be part of that change. We really need to think about our identities and not accommodate to what others are asking for us, but really try to create our own narratives and reclaim our own narratives, and think about our communities and what are the questions that our communities want answered, what are the issues that our communities want to change, not what are the issues that are being pushed on us. We want to demand what we want rather than dealing with what we have, with what we have right now. We want to demand more. We want to build power. And so my kind of like last call to all of you is to think about building community power in a way that is really centering our Tarbiya, in a way that is centering all of these principles that we embody as Muslims, all these principles that are taught to us and that are taught to us as spiritual and taught to us in our daily actions, but we really need to implement them societally and bring them outward. And that's something that we really have, alhamdulillah, the power to do because we have been raised with these moral compasses and with this moral compass. And it's really embodied within us. So how do we allow what's embodied within us to then transcend outwardly? So inshallah, I think that's where I'm going to end, and I'm welcoming questions or comments. Whatever I said was just kind of what I humbly put forward for you. I think a lot of people listening in are actually much more qualified and have been doing this a lot longer than me. But again, I said I'm humbled to have had the opportunity to talk to you all. Inshallah, also, I'm leaving my contact information for you all, and this is just for you guys to call me, text me, email me about like local issues that you want to talk about, maybe building campaign strategies together or analyzing communities together. I'm definitely offering myself as a resource to you all. So I'm going to end on that. We'll have Q&A after, but I will end with dua. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal 'asr, innal insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa 'amilus salihati tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Okay. Wafat, do you want to say anything before we start?
Yes, of course. Jazakallah khair,
Okay.
Amir. That was very beneficial. Jazakallah khair. I know I learned a few things, so I'm sure a lot of other people were able to pick up bits and pieces of the content. Just a reminder to everyone, will be available via, it is being recorded. It will be available online. So if you missed a few parts of the session or you would like to review more, because for me, at least, it was a lot of content at once. So it'd be nice to watch it a few more times. That will be available for you. Sister Abir, so far I have a comment and a question. The first is a comment from our dear brother Ahmed Musaddiq al-Rahman. He sent me a message to mention that a comment on what you were talking about, how it's a Tarbiya element, that MAS views Tarbiya as a comprehensively sorry, my notes. I'm sorry. MAS views Tarbiya as comprehensively covering all aspects of social life and society. And I apologize
Mhm.
for the hesitation, so I'm going to repeat it as a full sentence. MAS views Tarbiya as comprehensively covering all aspects of social life and society. So, if you wanted to, reflect on that, not just you, Sister Abid, but as an audience as well. And then I do have a question for you. I sent it to you, but I will say it out loud for the audience. How can we learn about local candidates' views so that we can make informed decisions?
Okay. Jazakallah khair.
Okay.
Definitely, you guys can keep on sending your questions as we go along. Um, so I will first answer the question that was proposed. So, how do you learn about local candidates' views? So this is something that again it takes a little bit of research, but it's definitely out there. Most local candidates, local newspapers write a lot of exposés about local candidates. But you can also look up the ballot and see who's running, and then you'll probably be able to Google that candidate, and they will most likely have a website and have all of their positionalities on this website. You can also call them specifically. Whenever somebody is running, they're going to open up a office, and they're going to have staff and people who are pushing their campaign. So there will be like all of these materials. So you can always look them up, call up the offices, and ask to have a meeting with this person. You can invite these people to your communities if you want. But I think that it's important to do the research and find local newspapers or local media outlets, but also local events that are happening. And a lot of times, people who are running locally are having town hall events. And there's a lot of like smaller debates that are happening besides the ones on CNN that you can find. Um, okay, and then just to comment on the second one is so Jazakallah khair for the comment, and um, yes, like 100% agree with that. That like Alhamdulillah, MAS views Tarbiya as comprehensively covering all aspects of social life and society. I think that like the point of kind of just going through this reminder is to make sure that that's something that we are translating to our communities. And Alhamdulillah, I think as MAS members, we have gone through this Tarbiya process, and we're taught to see things in this way. And I know because I like have the best political conversations with like my mas ammos and like khaltos, because in our community, because people are really seeing everything and analyzing them with this lens. But of course, people who are listening in, most people, if we're part of MAS, if we're in MAS, we're actively having a role in our community, whether we're leading a halakha, whether we're on a committee, etc., or we will be, and so we want to make sure to also translate this message, because I think that as much as we kind of see ourselves, as a reflection of the people around us, there are still massive members of our community who, we can tell by social media discussion, or we can tell by the conversations that we're having with them, are not seeing things this way. That are kind of just looking at candidates and just like not thinking with a more broader lens, and not thinking with an Islamically informed lens on how they're making social conscious decisions about their lives. Okay. Question number 2. Wafat, do you want to read it, or should I be reading this?
Whatever you're comfortable with. I could go ahead and just
Go ahead.
we'll say it out loud, inshallah. Question number 2 is, what do you think of candidate recommendations put together by Muslim organizations?
Okay. So I know that pretty much most of like the mainstream Muslim organizations are nonpartisan. So you think about people like CARE, etc., are putting out nonpartisan views. Because they can't. I think even as MAS, we're not endorsing candidates, etc. But there are Muslim community members, and there are Muslim organizations that are able to have like C4s, and they're endorsing candidates. I think that it's always important, and I think it's as part of Islam is that we are connected to our community. So it's always important to read these recommendations and thinking about the recommendations that are being put together by organizations. But I also like I said in the beginning, I want us to think again, to think more locally, and also have our own individual thought process when we're choosing candidates, because it is unfortunate that but it is a trend that a lot of times, whether it's on boards or it's people running organizations, etc., and this is not necessarily a critique of all Muslim organizations, and not even, this is a critique of even organizations that are within our community or outside our community. The people who are presenting the voice, the people who have platforms, the people who are putting together recommendations, or people who are speaking on tables on behalf of the community, are people who have the privilege to do that. And a lot of times that privilege comes in unjust ways. And I just want us to think about that and regulate that. Inshallah, that's not what is happening in communities, but we do know that does happen in the communities. And so there might be people who are working on the ground that are disagreeing with what people are recommending. And there might be community members that are going through certain issues, or they're facing certain issues, that community members who have the platforms to speak and recommend candidates, or the community members who have relationships with the candidates, are not thinking about, because they're not actually communicating to these members. So I want us to take these things into account, and like, of course, people who are building these organizations are building them with the intention of bringing, positive change to the community, and of course change that will benefit the community. But we also want to think, we want to think beyond that, and we also want to think beyond sometimes even how we see ourselves. So as a community, there's a huge conversation happening right now about addressing anti-Blackness in the community, and there are a lot of community members who are not addressing the changes or the injustices that are happening in the country. And maybe it's because their congregation is not facing those things, right? Or because they have a certain racial privilege that they're not facing that. Even though overall, I think that just as a community, we're facing the same systematic injustices as like many different groups. But a lot of people who have positions of power are not taking these marginalized voices into account. And so we want to think about who is representing and who is saying what and what they're saying. And I think the defining factor, or like the baseline thing, is thinking about who are the most marginalized, where is the injustice happening. Constantly ask yourself, where is the injustice happening in my community, in this nation, globally, and who are these people that it's happening to, and how can I align with them? And sometimes you may not be the person that the injustice is happening to, but therefore, if you're not, then you align with the people that it is happening to. Okay. more questions. Any more questions
That seems to
or
be so
comments?
far. If anyone has a question or comment that they would like me to ask or say on their behalf, just go ahead and send it to me via the chat box. Or if you just let me know to unmute you, I could do that and you could ask it over the audio. We're comfortable with either option, inshallah.
Okay.
Okay, it looks like you answered all our thoughts and concerns, Sister Abu. Jazakallahu khairan. If anyone still has a question or a comment or would like more information, Sister Abir's contact information is on the screen. And for those of you who do not have access to the screen right now, this presentation will be available as a recording, but I will go ahead and really quickly just say her number over the session so that those of you who are on your phone could write it down. It's 347 303 0609. And for the rest of you, it is on the screen again, just as a reference. Sister Abid, Jazakallah khairan. If you have anything else you'd like to close with or any last thought or advice that you could give us, please, the floor is yours.
Okay. No, I just want to say Jazakumullah khair to everybody who tuned in. And again, really humbled. I think that I was just proposing, this is pretty much just like a lot of the thoughts I've been having, but I really am interested in thinking about and also interested in being a resource to community. So of course, please contact me if you have any further questions or comments. And if you have anything to teach me, also contact me and let me know. So Jazakumullah khair, and I hope to, inshallah, see you all soon, reconnect.
Thank you for your time, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you everyone for attending, for giving us your time. I know on the East Coast it's a little late right now. It's 10:22. West Coasters it's 7:22. To all who attended, barakallahu fikum. It was great audience, mashallah. Please spread the word. We will be sending out the recording, inshallah, and it will be available on YouTube. Reach out to me if you have any concerns or advice regarding the webinar. My email is included at the very beginning of the chat box in your GoToMeeting control panel. Without further ado, we will conclude. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wal asr inna al-insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. جزاكم الله خيرا والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.